Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Comprehensive Guide to Science and Faith, exploring the ultimate questions about life and the cosmos. Edited by William A. Dembski, Casey Luskin, and Joseph M. Holden. Foreword by Stephen C. Meyer. Narrated by William Sarris. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures and tables present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Foreword. Beginning in about 2006, a group of scientists and philosophers known as the New Atheists ignited a worldwide publishing sensation. A series of best-selling books, led by Richard Dawkins's The God Delusion, argued that science, properly understood, undermines belief in God, and that science and theistic belief conflict. Other books by Victor Stenger, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, Stephen Hawking, and Lawrence Krauss followed suit. The New Atheists have explained the basis of their skepticism about the existence of God with admirable clarity. According to Dawkins and others, for a long time the evidence of design in life provided the best reason to believe in the existence of God, because it appealed to publicly accessible scientific evidence. But since Darwin, Dawkins insists, scientists have known that there is no evidence of actual design, only the illusion or appearance of design in life. According to Dawkins and many other neo-Darwinian biologists, the evolutionary mechanism of mutation and natural selection has the power to mimic a designing intelligence, without itself being designed or guided in any way. And since random mutation and natural selection, what Dawkins calls the blind watchmaker mechanism, can explain away all appearances of design in life, it follows that belief in a designing intelligence at work in the history of life is completely unnecessary. Although Dawkins allows that it is still possible that a deity might exist, he insists there is absolutely no evidence for the existence of such a being, thus rendering belief in God effectively delusional. Popular TV figure Bill Nye, the science guy, has echoed this perspective. In his book, Undeniable: Evolution and the Science of Creation, he says, "Perhaps there is intelligence in charge of the universe, but Darwin's theory shows no sign of it, and has no need of it." Consequently, Dawkins has concluded that Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist, and that a simpler and more parsimonious explanation of what we see in nature is that God does not exist. Other New Atheists, including Lawrence Krauss, say that physics also renders belief in God unnecessary. Krauss contends that the laws of quantum physics explain how the universe came into existence from literally nothing. Consequently, he argues, it is completely unnecessary, even irrational, to invoke a creator to explain the origin of the universe. Stephen Hawking, formerly of the University of Cambridge and until his death in 2018 the world's best-known scientist, made a similar argument in his book Brief Answers to the Big Questions. There, he argued that the universe was spontaneously created out of nothing, according to the laws of science. Consequently, for him, that meant the simplest explanation is that there is no God. This perception of a conflict between theistic belief and the clear implications of modern science has percolated into the popular consciousness. Recent polling data indicate that in North America and Europe, the perceived message of science has played an outsized role in the loss of belief in God. In one poll, more than two-thirds of self-described atheists and one-third of self-described agnostics affirm that the findings of science make the existence of God less probable. Not all scientists accept the idea that the findings of science and faith in God conflict. Instead, some religious scientists believe that science and faith cannot conflict. They subscribe to an idea known as compartmentalism, or what the late Harvard paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould called non-overlapping magisteria, or NOMA. Compartmentalism holds that science and religion describe completely different realities. Proponents often support this view by quoting an aphorism used by Galileo that affirms that the Bible teaches how one goes to heaven, not how the heavens go. Others subscribed to a closely related idea called complementarity. Proponents of this view hold that science and religion may sometimes describe the same realities. However, they do so in complementary but ultimately incompatible or non-commensurable language. Proponents of both views deny that science contradicts religious belief, but they do so by portraying science and religion as such totally distinct enterprises that their claims could not possibly intersect in any significant way. In other words, both models assume the religious and metaphysical neutrality of all scientific knowledge. This assumption seems to insulate theistic belief from scientific refutation, but it also denies the possibility that scientific evidence could offer any support for theistic belief. Thus, until recently, few scientists have thought, as Newton, Boyle, Kepler, and other founders of early modern science did, that the testimony of nature actually supports important tenets of a theistic or Judeo-Christian worldview. The authors of this volume deny that the evidence of the natural world, rightly understood, conflicts with theistic or Judeo-Christian belief. Many of them think that certain discoveries of modern science, in particular discoveries concerning biological and cosmological origins or discoveries about the nature of the human mind, may actually support theistic or Judeo-Christian belief. Here, in this book, they have helped to develop another understanding of the relationship between theistic belief and science, one that I call qualified agreement. This idea maintains that, when correctly interpreted, scientific evidence and theistic belief can and do support each other. While accepting some disagreement about details as inevitable, given the limits of human knowledge, advocates of this model affirm a broad agreement between the testimony of the natural world and the propositional content of Judeo-Christian theism, between science and religion so defined. Though advocates of qualified agreement acknowledge, with compartmentalism and complementarity advocates, that much scientific research and theorizing does address metaphysically and religiously neutral topics, we do not agree that all scientific theories have this characteristic. Instead, the qualified agreement model, like the conflict model, asserts that some scientific theories do have larger worldview or metaphysical implications. Nevertheless, unlike the conflict model, proponents of qualified agreement deny that the best or most truthful theories ultimately contradict a theistic or Judeo-Christian worldview. Instead, they view theological and scientific truth as issuing from the same transcendent and rational source, namely God. Advocates of qualified agreement anticipate, therefore, that these two domains of knowledge, when rightly understood and interpreted, will come increasingly into agreement as advocates in science and theology eliminate real points of conflict that sometimes have existed. Many of the founders of early modern science held this view of the relationship between science and Judeo-Christian religion. Indeed, from the late Middle Ages through the Scientific Revolution, roughly 1250 to 1750, scientists often affirmed the agreement between the book of nature and the book of Scripture, both of which were understood to be mutually reinforcing revelations of the same God. This present volume includes many authors who have helped to revive this perspective, and includes entries from them that will help you to consider it as well. In the Bible, in the book of Romans, St. Paul not only affirms that God created the world, but he also argues that the signs of God's handiwork are clearly perceived in the things that have been made. The collection of essays that you have in your hands considers whether scientific evidence supports this biblical claim. The authors of this volume, who include a diverse group of scientists, scholars, and theologians, also consider many other relevant questions about the relationship between scientific knowledge and theistic belief, or even biblical teaching. I encourage you to listen to their entries and arguments. If you do, I think you will find yourself better equipped to dialogue with your friends, family, and colleagues about the relationship between science and faith, and to explain how scientific evidence from the book of nature and insights from the book of Scripture can provide mutually reinforcing ways of knowing about our universe and its creator. Stephen C. Meyer, Ph.D., Director of Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture. Part 1. Science and Faith. 1. What are science and faith, and are they compatible? William A. Dembski. If by science we mean modern science, not medieval or ancient science, and if by faith we mean classic, orthodox Christian faith, not, say, Gnostic varieties of Christianity or other faiths entirely, such as Jainism or Islam, then science and faith are obviously compatible. After all, since the rise of modern science to the present day, top scientists have also been orthodox in their Christian theology, seeing no contradiction between their faith and their scientific work. Indeed, those most closely associated with the rise of modern science were overwhelmingly Christian. Atheists might counter that if Christian scientists really understood the full implications of science, they would understand that their Christian faith is, in the end, unsustainable. But such accusations, on closer analysis, always ring hollow and display special pleading, trying to make obviously bright and reflective scientists of faith seem like idiot savants who happen to be really good at their science but really bad in thinking through its implications, especially for their faith. As a case in point, while lecturing at the University of Toronto some years back, I encountered a biologist in the audience who claimed that evolution made it impossible to be a scientist of faith. Many scientists who are Christians believe in evolution. I'm not one of them, thinking the evidence for evolution to be sketchy at best. But it needs to be noted that many scientists hold to classic Christian orthodoxy, that is, the incarnation of God in the person of Jesus, his bodily resurrection and ascension, etc., and are also evolutionists, some even of a Darwinian stripe, seeing God as creating through an evolutionary process that gives no evidence of design. Of course, their interpretation of Scripture will be suspect to those who see Genesis as teaching that creation occurred a mere 6,000 years ago in 6 literal 24-hour days. If you think that a literalist interpretation of Genesis is crucial to being a Christian, then you'll deny that evolutionary science and Christianity are compatible. But that seems to be asking too much for the compatibility of science and faith. The more things you require to be believed, whether on the side of science or on the side of faith, the more incompatible you make the two. My own view, and the one I'm recommending in this chapter, is to take a minimalist approach to science and to faith. Don't make embracing science require holding on to too many controversial and suspect scientific views. And likewise, don't make faith major in minors, forgetting Christ, who purchased us with his blood. In any case, sociology confirms that top scientists have also been Orthodox Christians. Indeed, it's a matter of record that the Society of Scientists and the Society of Orthodox Christians intersect in a non-empty set. Certainly, we should be concerned about the compatibility of science and faith if no such people residing in both groups existed. As it is, I've personally engaged with not one but 2 Nobel laureates who were reasonably orthodox in their Christian faith, William Phillips at a conference in 1997 and Richard Smalley for lunch in Houston shortly before his death in 2005. So I can attest from personal experience that such people exist. Even so, it's always good to look deeper than sociology. What is modern science, and what is Orthodox Christian faith? And are they the types of things that do well together, as with things that are genuinely compatible? Is the relationship between science and faith like a happy marriage, in which the spouses mutually support and reinforce each other and reside in wedded bliss? Or is it more like an uneasy marriage, in which the spouses would just as soon be rid of each other, I personally think that modern science and Orthodox Christian faith can reside in something like wedded bliss, provided they are properly conceived. Let's look at science and faith more closely, starting with science. What is science? Science is a sustained and systematic inquiry into nature. It tries to understand nature. It does so through observation, experiment, and theory construction. It is evidence and reason-based. A scientific claim is considered true or compelling not because someone in authority asserts it to be so. Its strength in commanding our assent derives from the evidence for it and how it helps bring light to our understanding of nature. There are often aesthetic elements here, as in a scientific explanation being so pleasing or beautiful in how it ties things together and illuminates our understanding of nature that we think it must be so. Aesthetics, however, can also be misleading. A theory can be beautiful but untrue. Science is a fallible enterprise with many pitfalls. It has gotten some things astoundingly wrong. For example, alchemy, phlogiston, phrenology, the luminiferous ether, etc. Moreover, scientists have been implacably committed to wrong scientific theories, exuding a confidence in those theories that later was shown to be wholly unfounded. Indeed, the confidence with which scientists hold their theories is no gauge of their truth. We need always to keep a critical eye on such overconfidence, especially in public policy discussions where scientists or politicians acting in the name of science attempt to steamroll people into some view or course of action because science says it must be so. Science has gotten many things wrong, especially when invoked in public policy recommendations. Yet, provided that scientific discourse is allowed to be free and open, self-correction becomes a feature of science. Unfortunately, the self-correcting capacity of science is often more myth than reality, as when certain scientific theories attain a sacrosanct status and deny any place at the table to competitors. What is faith? The physicist Bob Bass was a friend of mine. A believing Roman Catholic, he died a few years back when in his 80s. He had been a Rhodes Scholar in the 1950s and had thereby gotten to meet Albert Einstein. As Bob shared with me, Frank Adelati, former president of Swarthmore College and head of the Institute for Advanced Study, was able to gather the 32 Rhodes Scholars at the time, one of them Bob, and have them meet with Einstein as the guest of honor. During their time together, Adelati posed this question. Now, Einstein, can you give these young men any parting advice? Note that the Rhodes Scholarship did not start admitting women until 1977. Einstein replied, "If I could give the young men any advice, it would be this. Don't believe anything is necessarily true just because you see it in the newspapers, or hear it on the radio, or everybody else believes it. Always think for yourself." Einstein was here giving crucial, important, and sound advice, and yet the spirit of this advice seems at odds with much of what typically goes by faith. Faith is often viewed as a matter of obedience, even slavish obedience, where you are expected to accept certain doctrines uncritically, and where any deviation marks you as a heretic, and thus outside the body of true believers. Instead of giving pride of place to think for yourself, faith is sometimes thought to underscore trust and obey. Now that I'm more than 40 years into my experience of the Christian faith, my conversion occurred in 1979, I don't see faith and science as conflicting in this way. The fact is, whatever we mean by an authentic or real Christian faith, it had better be a faith that you own, that you've thought through carefully for yourself, and where you're convinced that it holds up and can sustain you through life's toils and snares. The flip side is going through the motions, pretending you believe something when you really don't, often to keep people in authority happy. Your parents, perhaps, if you're younger, your deans and school presidents, if, like me, you taught at a seminary. If you are forced to pretend to believe something that you really don't think is true or holds up, you're asking for trouble. and this can hold as much in science as in faith. Science, as currently practiced, has its sacred cows and preferred dogmas, and if you step outside those boundaries, you can expect to be punished. Ditto for faith. The problem with pretending to be a believer is that you end up hating yourself for it. It makes for moral licensing, in other words, hypocritical behavior in which you allow yourself, that is, give yourself the moral license, to do things contrary to what you say you believe, because you don't really believe. Think climate change advocates flying in private jets to climate change conferences. Think Christians advocating the sanctity of marriage, but cheating on their spouses and getting divorced. It's been said that God only has children, not grandchildren. You cannot inherit the Christian faith as you inherit a piece of land. Your faith is an intrinsic part of you, but it is truly your faith only if you have thought it through, worked it out, and embraced it deeply. Such a faith is not a matter of convenient assent, as in, gee, I better say I believe this and that because others will be unhappy with me if they suspect I have doubts about those things, to say nothing of my actively disbelieving them. So I would say Einstein's dictum about thinking for yourself holds as much for faith as for science. It must precede commitment and obedience. Science and truth. The question of truth in science, as well as in faith, needs now to be addressed. For many, science seems less concerned about truth than faith, whose concern with truth is non-negotiable. Orthodox Christian faith, I'm talking lowercase o Orthodox, as in the sense of the Christianity encapsulated in the early church creeds, as opposed to that form of Christianity known as Eastern Orthodoxy, claims to know and articulate humanity's chief truth, namely that God, by taking human form in Jesus, then dying on the cross, and then rising bodily from the dead, redeems fallen humanity. To this chief truth we can add the Apostles' and Nicene creeds. Lowercase o Orthodox Christians believe these creeds to state the exact truth about their faith. This is not to say these creeds are exhaustive of Christian truth, but they do capture the basic core. Science, on the other hand, often seems less about finding the exact truth about nature than about successfully understanding and explaining natural phenomena. Success here can refer to the ability of science to help us build stable bridges or predict certain measurements, but without any pretense for knowing the exact truth about nature. Some philosophers of science go further, contending that the success of science argues for its truth. How could science be so successful without being true? Some see science as approximating truth in an endless quest to approach the truth, yet never quite hitting it on the head. Others take a more empirical approach, seeing the value of science in its ability to faithfully describe and predict our observations of natural phenomena, sometimes called empirical adequacy. And others take a pragmatic approach, in which any ideas that help advance our understanding of nature are seen as legitimate. The philosopher Wittgenstein took this latter approach, arguing that neither Copernicus nor Darwin gave us the truth, but rather a fruitful way of looking at nature. My own sympathies lie more with the empirical and pragmatic approaches to science. Look where I might in science, and I see a fallible enterprise where yesterday's ways of viewing nature give way to today's more powerful ways of viewing nature. I therefore have no confidence that we've arrived, and that science has come to the end of the line, with tomorrow's science identical to today's science. Science is fallible, as the history of science demonstrates. Some philosophers of science even write of a pessimistic induction, in which the consistent failure of scientific theories to withstand the tests of time demonstrates that no scientific theory is to be taken too seriously. Even Newton's laws of motion, which seemed in their day to capture exactly how nature operated, have been displaced. Along came Einstein. Then came quantum mechanics. Newton's laws were shown to work for a certain range of phenomena, but not beyond. And even where Newton's laws work, newer theories suggested that they are approximations and not exact renditions of the natural phenomena in question. Once one accepts that science is in a state of flux, that it is a fallible human enterprise, and that it stands in constant need of correction, certain grandiose claims about science immediately fall by the wayside. Take, for instance, the claim that the only knowledge that deserves to be taken seriously is scientific knowledge. From such a claim, it obviously follows that Orthodox Christian faith doesn't rank and needs to be discarded. But what is the nature of the claim that only scientific knowledge deserves credence? Is it a scientific claim? Obviously not. No experiment or observation or act of reason or theoretical insight justifies it. The view that only science constitutes legitimate knowledge is known as scientism, and it is self-referentially incoherent. In other words, it defeats itself, and because it defeats itself, scientism can be safely disregarded. Methodological naturalism. Another grandiose claim made in the name of science is that science is uncompromisingly committed to methodological naturalism, also known as methodological atheism or methodological materialism. The idea here is that science needs to treat nature as following unbroken natural laws, without leaving any place for things like divine action or miracles. As the argument goes, if science were to allow for God to intervene in the world, then anything could happen, and science could offer no insight into what nature does and displays. This sounds good if one thinks, for instance, of a forensic scientist trying to understand money missing from a safe. Without methodological naturalism, would this forensic scientist need to take seriously the possibility that God, or perhaps Satan, removed the money by making it magically dematerialize from the safe? But in fact, methodological naturalism is just an arbitrary rule for doing science, and who gets to set the rules? Our word science derives from the Latin word scientia, which was the generic Latin word for knowledge. All knowledge. In the 19th century, the term came to mean specialized knowledge of nature. But the fact is that what we call science today has a long history, and throughout much of that history, it was called natural philosophy. What's more, the rules of science or natural philosophy have changed over time. Scientists most responsible for the rise of modern science, such as Copernicus, Kepler, and Newton, rejected methodological naturalism outright, finding in nature clear, scientifically discernible marks of the divine intelligence. At best, methodological naturalism should be regarded as a starting point for scientific inquiry, in which we try to understand phenomena in terms of undirected natural laws and processes. But if those do not suffice, then intelligently directed or even supernatural explanations may become reasonable. Jesus turning water into wine defies methodological naturalism, and even a forensic scientist trying to understand the disappearance of money from a safe might be convinced of a supernatural dematerialization of the money if sufficient safeguards were put on the safe to monitor the money during its disappearance. Of course, in such circumstances, one can always appeal to unknown and perhaps unknowable natural laws that might have been at play. But such appeals to ignorance can be less insightful and less convincing than simply ascribing a divine miracle. We know, for instance, how nature brings about wine, namely through a lengthy process of fermentation. We know of no natural process by which water is instantaneously transformed into wine. If it happened, it was a miracle. That's why metaphysical naturalists, that is, those who think that nature is all there is, will not try to defend that some natural process did indeed turn water into wine at the wedding at Cana, but rather will argue that the Bible is in error when it attributes the miracle to Jesus. Where methodological naturalism becomes especially problematic for science is with intelligent design. Intelligent design is the study of patterns in nature that are best explained as the result of intelligence. Yet from a
Sample complete. Ready to continue?